Here we go. Hello, my name is Simon Motture. I'm a senior systems engineer with Nutanix, and today we're going to be walking through a demonstration of the application of virtual machine automation technology through Nutanix Calm. I'm coming to you live from my own home office down in beautiful southern Maryland. So what I'd like to do is walk into the main console for Nutanix that we call Prism Central. This is a manager console. From here, we manage multiple clusters from a central pane of glass. In the lab that I have today, from which I'm going to be performing this demonstration, I only have one cluster, but Prism Central can certainly manage more than one cluster. So before we begin with the automation technology today, demonstration, I'd like to walk you through just a bit of this cluster that we're going to be deploying virtual machines and applications to, so you have an idea of what we're deploying to and how it's currently set up. So if I log in here, this is an individual cluster that's running the AHV or Acropolis hypervisor. This hypervisor comes with Nutanix, with our clusters, with our software at no additional charge. We offer to give our customers freedom of choice of the hypervisor so that they can choose if they want to use any enterprise class hypervisor from other vendors such as VMware vSphere, Microsoft Hyper-V. They can certainly do that. It's 100% supported. But for those customers that want to take advantage of Acropolis hypervisor, they get to do so at no additional charge. This is the main screen. This is what it looks like when someone logs into a Nutanix cluster. And what I'd like to do is drill down into the hardware section for a second and just show you this representation of a 2U appliance that's running 4 individual compute nodes from where we're actually going to run these virtual machines. Now, this 2U appliance is also made up of multiple disk drives. As you can see, I can click on any of them. These are all SSD drives. This is 100% all flash in this particular appliance. And so speaking of storage, what we do is we actually take all of those disk drives across all of those nodes and we combine them into one large storage pool, in this case 15.61 TB of raw storage that's made available to the cluster. And then from there we create a logical grouping from which we'll actually install virtual machines into. And so the logical usable space would be 7.63 TB of space into which we can actually create storage containers. Storage containers is just simply a logical grouping into which we put virtual machines. So speaking of virtual machines, let me click on this tab here and you can see some of the VMs that are currently deployed on this cluster. Now, we're about to show you some automation, and if you were with me on the last presentation that I did, we covered deploying Linux-based applications, specifically a MySQL database with an HA proxy and some Linux-based web servers, so a 3-tiered architecture that we did in the last demonstration. Today's demonstration is going to be focused on Windows virtual machines and applications. Specifically, we'll be deploying Microsoft SQL Server, as well as Microsoft IIS, and then finally a bug track application. We'll be doing that all automatically through Nutanix Calm. So before I actually jump into the automation, I'd like to begin by showing folks how we manually create virtual machines just for comparison. So if I want to, I can name the virtual machine whatever I like. I can assign various different vCPUs and cores, however much memory I might need for any particular virtual machine. I can install ISOs into virtual CDs. I can add individual disks, new disks if I want, so that I can actually initialize new disks to install software on them. Or I can actually pick and choose vDisks that are already pre-deployed on the cluster. So I've already uploaded things like Windows 2012, I've uploaded Microsoft SQL Server, so on and so forth, and added those to my cluster. So now they're available for me to select when I'm creating or deploying virtual machines. And then, of course, I want to assign a virtual NIC. In this case, I have different VLANs. In my case, I've only created 2. You can have as many VLANs as you like. In my case, my VLAN 0 I've labeled simply VM. So I'm going to choose that one. And then, of course, other things that we can do here as we're setting up is choose affinity roles. So this is a cluster, and if one of the nodes in the cluster went down for any reason, including maintenance, you would have an HA event. The virtual machines that are on that node would potentially HA over to the other nodes remaining in the cluster. And then, of course, we have affinity roles so that you can choose if there's any nodes that, for whatever reason, you do or do not want virtual machines to fail over to. So for now, I'm going to cancel out of this manual process to create virtual machines because the focus today will be on automation. In addition, before we jump into the automation, one other thing I'd like to show you is the cloning of virtual machines. So this is how we take an existing virtual machine and make a clone of it. We can give it a prefix name. And then, of course, I can modify the existing configuration for CPU, memory, disks. I can add disks, remove disks, put them on different VLANs, etc., and hit save. Again, I'm going to cancel out of this for now. I just wanted you to have a comparison of how we do things manually versus how we're going to automate today. So again, if I jump back into the Prism Central console, from here is where we actually connect to and access Nutanix Calm technology, from where we're actually going to be deploying a blueprint today. This blueprint is this one right here. This one is the multi-tiered application that installs the bug trap application. I'm going to go ahead and fire this off and let it begin, and then we'll go ahead and talk about what it's doing here. So I'm going to just call it SM-bugtrack. In fact, I think I'm going to do an underscore here, and I'm going to put my name for user initials and hit create. So just fired off this application. Now this is a multi-tiered application. It's got a database as well as IIS server, and it's currently starting to deploy. What I'll do is I'll walk you through the configuration, walk you through the entire process. As you can see in the user interface here, we see it's actually provisioning. And we'll come back to this screen in a little bit, and we'll look at the audit, and we'll see how this is building out the application. Of course, it's just beginning. So since this is going to be working, let's go ahead and talk about how we built this application. So again, here I have representation of two virtual machines represented by these icons on the screen here. If I click on the one for Microsoft SQL Server, as you can see, I've got various different settings for the service name, for the name of the actual virtual machine, and then, of course, the cloud provider that I'm going to deploy this virtual machine to. So Calm does have the ability to deploy both to an on-premise private enterprise cloud from Nutanix, or Calm can also deploy to a public cloud such as Amazon AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google GCP, etc. But for today's demonstration, I'm simply deploying to an on-premise Nutanix cluster. Now, of course, you can see down here there's other information about configuring the virtual machine, such as how many virtual CPUs, how much memory. And then we get into the area of sysprep. So after we've installed the operating system, we need to run sysprep. And this is actually the script that we're going to use to be able to do that. So this script is available to us. And I can do other things that I'm not bothering to do in my demonstration today. I can do things like join this virtual machine to an Active Directory domain if I wanted to do that. I can assign various different virtual disks, clone them from an image, and choose whichever vdisk I might need to deploy, whether this is an individual disk that needs to be initialized or whether it's a disk that's preloaded with additional software. It can also be an ISO. In this case, if I have one down here, like this 100 gig disk, we're going to have to initialize that. Now, of course, we have down here different areas for installing and selecting the various different VLANs that we might want to choose, as well as the credentials, such as administrator credentials, and label those credentials, such as I've done here, so that they're available in the dropdown. Now, in addition to installing the virtual machine, you have the concept of installing application packages within inside the virtual machine. You have both install scripts and uninstall scripts. So once I select the install scripts, over here on the left, you'll see three different tasks. First one, if I click on it, is actually a PowerShell command that we're going to use with with Windows credentials, administrator credentials, to run a script that is actually going to initialize that 100 gig disk for us. And after we do that, then what we're going to do is execute yet another PowerShell script with Windows credentials. And in this case, what we're going to do is install Microsoft SQL Server through this script here. The next and final thing that we're going to do for SQL is execute our final PowerShell command, again with the same credentials, but this one is going to apply the appropriate firewall roles we need to make sure that the IIS server can communicate with SQL back and forth. Likewise, if I click on the IIS application icon, you can see all the setup information for the virtual machine. Again, I can pick and choose what cloud provider. Again, I'm choosing Nutanix as the on-premise cloud provider as opposed to a public cloud in this case. And I'm choosing the operating system. This one is going to be Windows. I can have variable names for the name of the virtual machine. I can specify various different configuration settings for CPU, memory. And then, of course, I want to run my sysprep script. In this case, this is the sysprep script that I'm going to be running against my IIS VM. Again, I have the ability, if I need to join this virtual machine to a domain, I can do that. And then I can set up the various different virtual disks, which one's going to be bootable, which ones I might have available to me that I might need to initialize. And then, of course, which VLAN do I want this virtual machine to be on. Now, of course, when I go into packages for this particular virtual machine and I click on the install, in this case, you're going to see 4 different installation packages for IIS. The first one is PowerShell command. What it's doing is it's implementing the credentials to connect, but it's doing the initialized disk, that 100 gig disk that we saw earlier. And then, of course, it's installing the web server components through yet another PowerShell command. It's going to go ahead and run this script that's available to us. Once that's completed, it's going to move over to installing a PowerShell command that runs this set of scripts that installs Microsoft .NET features. And then finally, once that's completed, we'll be able to finally run our last PowerShell command that is actually going to install our application, which is our BugNet or bug tracker application. Now, all of this is the configuration to actually specify what we want to deploy, when we want to deploy it. And again, let's go back to the application and let's see how that guy is progressing. So if I go back to the audit, and I can see at the top of the screen, it's still provisioning, it's not completed yet. I can see what it's done so far is it's provisioning the IIS virtual machine. I can see the script that it's chosen. I can see that it's fetching the ISO that we needed to do the installation. It's moving on to installing SQL, and then it's finally also moving on to the packages. So it's beginning with the packages for SQL first, and after it's finished with all the SQL ones, only then will it move on to the packages for IIS. So you can see it moved on so far. It's initializing the disk for SQL Server, and it's now working on installing SQL Server. So we'll come back in a few minutes and see how it's progressing in installing IIS. So another thing that I want to do is show you some of the settings, and this is actually the targets. So this is where we would set up what are we going to be able to deploy to. And again, Nutanix COM has the ability to deploy to an on-premise Nutanix cluster. Think of that as a private cloud. Or Nutanix has the ability to deploy to a public cloud such as AWS, Microsoft Azure, GCP. So this is setup information. If you chose Azure, you just simply enter your subscription ID, your directory tenant ID, your application client ID, your client key secret, and hit save, and then you'd be able to deploy these applications to Azure. Likewise, if you do have an Amazon AWS account, enter your access key, enter your secret access key, and any regions that you might have, hit save, and you'd be able to deploy applications right from COM out to AWS and manage all the things that we're about to show you today. Same thing for other cloud providers that you can see here, and I'll also show you how we set up Nutanix. So the way we set up Nutanix is we enter the IP address for the Prism Central console, for example, what we're logged into right now, with the actual credentials to log in. Once we've done that, then we can actually use that to deploy on-premise. I'm going to delete and hit cancel because I've actually got that configured. So this is our on-premise technology. Now also, we have the concept of projects here. So I've got the project that I've labeled Simon Lab. And I can drill down here for various different credentials, my targets, whether it's my on-premise cloud or off public cloud. But this is interesting too because we have the ability to set quotas for various different users with role-based administration. So users can log in, but they can be limited to how much virtual CPU, how much virtual storage, how much virtual memory they have available to them for deploying. Then in addition to that, you have other various different global environment variables that you might assign, such as credentials, such as we might want to use the administrator account for Windows virtual machines. We might want to use the root logon credentials for any Linux-based virtual machines. And then I might want to set up some default parameters for default Windows virtual machines with variables such as how do I want to name these, how much vCPU memory and storage I want to assign. So again, starting down here with the disks, I can clone from the image service and choose one of the available vDisks, select that guy as bootable, and continue adding additional disks if I need to. This little running man indicates whether or not at the time in which the user goes into the blueprint, if they have the ability or not to modify that. So you can give users the ability to modify that when they're actually creating blueprints and firing them off. And of course, what VLAN do you want users to be able to use? And again, what logon credentials, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in addition to that, we also have this concept of a marketplace. So with Nutanix, we've already provided a bunch of blueprints available that can be used to deploy various different applications. And as you can see, there's multiple pages of applications, of blueprints for applications that come right out of the box. So for example, if I go back to this blueprint that we're working on here, and discard changes there, I can do things like download this blueprint, I can launch the blueprint, or I can even publish it. If I publish it, I can actually decide whether I want approval for this process or not. Now, I've already done that, and I've submitted it for approval. So we'll go back in, and I'll show you the one in the marketplace. So when I actually go back to the marketplace here, if I type my initials, actually, let me go over here to the approval. Nope. Yep, here we go. Okay. So we can actually see that this blueprint is here in the marketplace. This means that any user that comes into COM with role-based administration can now see this, and all they'd have to do is click launch. They wouldn't have to worry about creating the blueprint, worrying about what's inside it. They could just simply fire it off. But it has gone through an approval process, and I selected OK for that. So again, if I was in this blueprint, and I select it, and I say I want to publish it, I give it a name, and what we're going to do is I'm going to delete some of these spaces here prior to publishing it, because I know it doesn't like spaces in the marketplace, and it also doesn't like numbers and dashes, so I'm just going to do that. I'm going to call this number 2 and hit submit for approval. Version is required. So I need a version. So I'm going to just use this designation 1.1.1. Actually, why don't I choose 1.1.2? Submit for approval. Okay. So now that guy has actually made it into the marketplace. So let's go back and look at the marketplace and type in my initials, but we don't see that one that's 2. So where is it? Well, it's hiding up here in the approval pending. So this is where we have the ability to have blueprints approved before they're published out to the marketplace for the rest of the user community to be able to use and deploy. So what you would do is, if you're in approval process, is select that guy. You could actually launch it, take a look, see what it does. And if you like it, you could obviously approve it or not, delete it. I'm going to go ahead and say approve. And now you see it's moved over here to the marketplace. And if I hit my initials, we'll see both of these guys. So this is the one that I just deployed to the marketplace. So let's go back and look at this application. It's still provisioning. So while it's provisioning, let's take a look and see how it's progressed further since we last looked. So I think last we were working on the SQL Server package install. And you can see that what it did is it initialized the disk. Then it moved on to installing SQL. And then it did the firewall roles. And along the way, each one of these individual scripts, we'll see the time in which we did it, we see the success or not, we see the actual script that was utilized to actually deploy this particular task, if you will, and then we'll see any output. So what is the output of running that particular script for that particular task? Same for each one of these different guys, the initialize the disk, the install SQL, and the setting up the firewall roles. Now, after we've done that, we're going to go ahead and create a database, and it's working on doing that. And it's actually completing this. So it's not finished yet. So what we're going to do is go and look at some other things and come back to this in just a second. So while we're doing that, here's the overview section. This is showing me how many virtual machines are deployed in this particular application. What's the state? Are they on or off? What are some of the environment variables? What's the actual blueprint? And then, of course, I can come over here to manage. Now, this is when we start to take a look at some of the predecessor, successor type information that's available to us for the different components within this application. So within this application, we have 2 virtual machines. Within these virtual machines, there's multiple tasks that are going on and applications that are being installed, some of which cannot start until others finish before we can do a create. Now, we also have these other processes here. So if I click on the start area, you can see the screen, it looks a little bit different. Again, we have the predecessor, successor about who can start first, who can start next, depending on what we're doing. Are we starting the application? Are we restarting it? Are we stopping it, deleting, or just doing like a soft delete? So this is the manage area. And then, of course, under the service, this is where we can actually see the virtual machines that are being deployed, the actual IP address that's been assigned to these guys, the disk drives that are assigned, so on and so forth. Likewise, what I can do is if I go back to the cluster, and what I'll do is I'll use a filter and just type my initials so that you can see these are the 2 virtual machines that are now on the cluster with the IP addresses that are assigned. So I can actually log into these guys if I want, and I can monitor the behavior. If I want, I can simply launch this console. So those of you that are familiar with vSphere technology, for example, you don't need a tool like vCenter. You simply use Nutanix Prism to log into all of these different virtual machines from a central management console. So again, here is the blueprint. And I think we've covered everything that I think I need to cover in here. We've talked about launching, we talked about downloading, publishing. I can save. The other thing that I haven't done yet is, if you recall all of these different tasks, I talked about all these different scripts that are available. You might be wondering, well, how do we manage all these scripts? Well, one of the things I can do is hit this, when I'm creating the blueprint, I can hit this button that says Browse Library. So I have this library that's available to me, and I can show you that I can just simply select that guy and hit select. And what it would do is take that available script and put it here into the actual task. So let me show you where this library is over here. So this is the central place of managing scripts. And where this might become useful is you might have a variety of different users or developers or virtual machine admins who are deploying a variety of different applications and virtual machines. And as opposed to them all creating their own individual scripts or rewriting different scripts, maybe some of the same things, what they could do is actually upload their scripts here to this particular library. Then they can be utilized by everyone as they're actually customizing various different applications. As an example, you can see here I have my install and uninstall script for my web servers. I have my install uninstall script for my Linux-based MySQL, and I have my uninstall and install script for my Linux-based HA proxy. And then, of course, I have my scripts for my Windows virtual machines for this bug track applications, things like installing and initializing the disk, applying the firewall rules, installing the web server, the IIS, and the .NET features, right? So all of these scripts and any script can be uploaded to this particular library, and then it can be reused for efficiencies once you're creating applications. So as I continue to look here, let's go ahead and finally look down here and see where we're at. I can see that IIS is starting, so we're just about finished with this actual application. Once it's completed, then we'll actually be able to log into this application and see finally what it's doing. So it might take a few more minutes. Oh, there it goes. It just said running. So you notice at the top, the state of this application, it changed from provisioning to running. And I can see pretty much everything has completed. IIS is created. It's actually starting IIS right now. And I should be able to go into the overview. And I see a hypertext link for the BugNet application, which will allow me to just simply right-click on it and say open in a new tab. So if I do that, remember, we've just deployed this application through automation. So for the first time, it's going to need to process this, and I simply click on the link, and it's going to open up this BugNet application for us, and then we can start to create projects. So I need to click on this link for the first time to access the application. This will take just a few seconds here after we click on this guy, and it's going to present to us the actual application that we just deployed within a few minutes. Here it is. Then I can do things like create a new project, log in, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a fully functional, multi-tiered application for managing bugs in your environment that we have just deployed through Microsoft IIS as well as Microsoft SQL Server, all done through a central pane of glass, through a central console that we call Prism Central, using our technology that we call CALM. So again, my name is Simon Motture. I'm a senior systems engineer with Nutanix, and today's demonstration has been on application automation with Nutanix CALM. I want to thank you for your time and your attention, and I hope to have you guys join on the next demo that we do. Thanks again, and if you like, feel free to give me a call or an email, send me a text anytime. My contact information is below. And thanks again for your time.